Welcome back. You're watching Bloomberg News. I'm Mark Crumpton.
And I'm Lori Rothman. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. The worst financial crisis since the Great Depression failed to pop America's executive pay bubble. That is the conclusion of a new compensation study released today. Bloomberg's Peter Cook has the numbers from Washington. Peter.
Lori, this is the 16th year the Institute for Policy Studies has examined executive excess, and the left-leaning think tank found that while the recession took a toll on the country in 2008, most of America's top corporate executives didn't feel that pain, especially the CEOs of financial firms that received government bailouts. The average compensation for CEOs of the 20 biggest recipients of TARP money was $13.8 million in 2008. That compares to just over $10 million on average for S&P 500 CEOs last year. That figure is a 4.4% drop from 2007, but still 319 times what the average worker made in 2008, or $31,589. One of the report's co-authors says the numbers should convince Congress and the administration to go beyond current proposals to rein in executive pay.
I also think we need to look at the overall level of pay. I think as long as people can continue to be able to make tens of millions of dollars in bonuses, it is going to encourage outrageous behavior that can endanger our whole economy.
As we've reported previously, of all the TARP company CEOs, Goldman Sachs' Lloyd Blankfein had the biggest payday in 2008, over $41 million. His three-year haul, over $151 million. The report also looked at pay for the government officials asked to put out the financial fire. So how much did they make last year? Well, President Bush's pay was $400,000 in 2008. Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke earned a little less than $197,000. FDIC Chair Sheila Bair received just under $163,000, while the starting pay for an SEC compliance examiner was just over $55,000. By comparison, in 2008, the worst year for Wall Street since the 1920s, the 68,000 employees in New York's financial industry received end-of-the-year bonuses that averaged $112,000. Mark and Lori?
Peter Cook joining us from Washington. Peter, thanks. Let's dig deeper into executive pay. Joining us now, Russ Gerson. He is the CEO of the Gerson Group, an executive recruiter for financial services companies. And in 2008, Mr. Gerson was named to Business Week's top 150 list of the world's most influential headhunters. Welcome to Bloomberg News.
Good afternoon.
You heard Peter Cook's report. Where is all this coming from about executive pay? Is this just a sign of the economic times, or was it out of control before?
Well, I think they've
and I guess that's subjective. I shouldn't say out of control. Some people might think it's just fine.
Yeah, I think they've got it wrong. I mean, these are mostly public companies that are owned by shareholders that have boards of directors that determine compensation, and they determine it based on competitive forces. And I think once you start fooling around with these competitive forces, you have all sorts of unintended consequences. So, yeah, are these executives worth it? It's very hard to make that kind of judgment. You know, these numbers are very, very high, and significantly higher than these other S&P 500 companies. Obviously, significantly higher than public service or broadcasting or whatever.
You see a storm the Bastille populist mentality where people are saying, well, you know what? So many people are doing so poorly. Why should these guys or ladies make all this type of money?
But that's our capitalist system.
Yeah.
And if you start affecting that, you try to control it, you have all sorts of unintended consequences about how the capitalist system works.
You've mentioned unintended consequences 2 times in our short conversation. Just if you could expound upon that, what could be the fallout? Well,
you start regulating a U.S. company and you start regulating compensation. They perform less. They don't perform as well because they have lesser executives running them. And you have other companies, foreign companies, that are competing with these institutions for people. And you run the risk that your leading financial services industry starts shifting to England or France or Germany or Hong Kong.
Is it really the people who... I heard somebody at one point say, all of these talented people got us into this mess in the first place, right, referring to the credit crisis. So is it really the nature of the economy and what we've seen, or is it really about people and their inherent abilities and talents that create ideas and products, et cetera?
Well, I think you're right on both accounts. I think if you look at what happened, there was a lot of reward for taking risks and being successful, but there was very little penalty for failure. But that's a function of the way that these organizations set up compensation.
What's the solution, though? Because, you do have these traders, right, who are making $100 million just from getting lucky. Well, that's debatable, too, I suppose. But, there's got to be a happy medium in 30 seconds, and then we're going to pick up after the commercial.
Yeah, I think you have to look at how these organizations are run. You have to look at how they're governed. You have to look at how they structure their compensation for performance. But I think the organizations need to think about that. I don't think it's the government's job to be doing that.
And as Lori said, we'll pick that up after the commercial. Russ Gerson, CEO and founder of the Gerson Group, joining us this afternoon. We'll be right back. Bloomberg News continues in just a moment. We are back with Russ Gerson, CEO of the Gerson Group, an executive recruiter for financial services companies, and we're talking about the executive paycheck. Mr. Gerson, thanks for staying through the break. What should regulators be focusing on, if not pay?
I think it's about the whole corporate governance structure of these organizations, how they manage the firms. Because compensation is set by the market. Institutions pay people what they need to pay them to attract them and keep them. And they should be looking, I think, much more on how the boards set the governance of these companies. Yeah, if they're going to do anything.
And it almost seems something like this had its genesis even before we got into the middle of this, because there was that whole uproar over how much Dick Grasso was getting paid, and some people said maybe the corporate governance should have kicked in then, because the NYSE nonprofit organization, why is he getting that much money?
Yeah, that same thing. It's a little less relevant because the NYSE didn't have shareholders that were actually owners of the company.
And he had some good friends on the board as well.
Yeah, so that's a little different type of situation, but where the focus should have been there is on the board and how they made decisions. And it's very similar here. But the shareholders effectively choose the boards choose the chief executives, and they set the compensation.
So why do the CEOs get penalized then? If they're not the ones they're not the ones setting the compensation, why are they being penalized?
Well, the CEOs in some cases should be penalized if the company doesn't perform. And that's up to the board to make those decisions.
And that's a different argument.
Right.
That's based. We're talking about performance-based incentives then, as opposed to
a sliding scale. Would that be a solution?
I don't think there's any specific solution. There are lots of different ways to cut this. But at the end of the day, you want to incentivize the leaders of your companies to perform. You want to be able to attract high-quality executives to these firms.
From where you're sitting as chairman of a hedge fund, headhunting business, how are you changing your business, changing your candidates, preparing them perhaps for this new era that we're coming into? Whatever you think of the executive pay regulation, it's probably, well, I shouldn't say, well, who knows what the future holds, but they're looking at tweaking it. We'll leave it at that. So how are you taking that?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the market will regulate this. I think we will go through transformational change in compensation. And I'm advising my companies, my clients, to be cautious with comp. Not just because of regulatory
are you coming out saying, I know this is what you would have expected to have been paid a year ago, 2 years ago, but this is what it's going to be, today?
Right. That it's going to be lower. There are going to be more incentives based on, it's going to be much more performance-oriented, and there are going to be penalties for non-performance.
And that's the key.
And that I think is the key.
And the scary part.
Well, you don't want to incentivize a CEO to take undue risks because they think if they perform really well, they're going to make a lot of money, but not really still get paid if the company loses money. So you have to be able to take that into account.
Mr. Gerson, could we ask you quickly about the comments from Robert Ben-Moshe of AIG, comments he was making about New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo? What are your thoughts on that?
I think he reacted emotionally. Listen, I think there was a lot of, he was right to think a lot of things he said, but I'm not sure he should have actually said it. You don't want to necessarily get those kinds of emotions and that kind of aggressive type of language out there. But there was a good reason for him to say what he did say.
Russ Gerson, the CEO and founder of the Gerson Group, joining us this afternoon. Mr. Gerson, thanks. Appreciate it.
Nice to be here.